Welcome back to Prime for Battle. With the arrival of the Gloomspite Gitz battle tomb, I thought, what a good opportunity to paint up Trugg, the Troggoth King, who I've been eyeing off for some time. So, welcome, and today I'm going to show you the processes that I went through to paint Trugg. You can see the paints that I used on the screen in front of you, and let's jump on in and get started. So I started off with a black prime. From there I went into an Eshin grey layer / dry brush. It was a fairly heavy dry brush over the abdomen and sort of the upper body, and also the some of the stonework and the weapon. From there I moved into Bugsman's Glow for the legs and arms and face, really sort of sticking to that box art style for the most part. Now I've used some Xandri dust and I've applied that to all the stonework and mineral growth and vines and stuff on his back, just to start bringing in a bit of colour variation to the greys. And then I've also dry brushed a little bit lightly over his face just to start highlighting some of that texture. From there I've gone into Druchii Violet shade and I've applied this over the entirety of the skin. So that's both the Bugman's Glow as well as the grey areas, just to really tie them together a bit and bring a bit of sort of flushed colour to the skin. Now I'm going to start some work with the Ushabti bone. I'm going to focus on the belly area with some dry brushing and building that up, but I'm also going to go through and do all of the toenails and fingernails as well as the teeth, and also dry brushing it lightly over all of the areas of the skin where there's some texture around the knuckles, the folds, and some of the rough areas of skin. And then following that up, similar process with the Wraith bone, covering about 80% of the inner area of the belly, and then also about the same with the nails and the teeth, just sort of really focusing on the tip down to about 80% of the coverage. Then I applied Carroburg Crimson over all of the face area to start really flushing out that face with a bit more pinkish tones. Now I'm going to fill in those, I guess, sort of brands or scarring, ritual scarring on the skin, and I'm using Berserker Bloodshade and just really taking my time with a nice fine tipped brush and just sort of loading up the brush a little bit, not too much, and just filling in those lines. Given that they're sculpted in, it should make it a little bit easier for you to fill those in. Just take your time and slowly work around it, and if you do need to fix some errors up where you might have gone outside of the lines a little bit, just take a little bit of the Wraith bone and cover that up once it's all dried, and it should blend together pretty well. Now I'm going to start working on the horns a little bit, and I'm going to use some Skeleton Horde. You want to allow a bit of a heavy contrast on this, so I let it build up a bit in the brush and apply it onto the horn so that you get a bit of pooling but not too much. If you can sort of see, I've allowed it to build up a little bit in the recesses. From there I'm using some Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to cover all of the, I guess, mineral sort of stone growth that leads up to the stone steps all around on his shoulders and down his back. So now on the stone, I'm going to use some Mortarion Grime. I'm just going to apply that over the entire of the stone, and this will start building up some of the earthy, mossy stains and tones as we apply various different greens and colors over this stone area. While that's drying, I'm going to use some Gore-Grunta Fur, which is a nice rich browny reddish color, and I'm going to use that for the handle of his weapon, which is clearly a tree trunk or a tree branch. Now, using some Croak Green, we're applying this over the sort of top 3 to 4 stones on the arch on the top there, and just building that up. It can be a bit uneven with it, it is sort of staining and weathering, and then I'll just apply a little bit of that around in various corners and cracks on the steps as well. Now, coming down to his loincloth, I'm going to just do that in a coat of Flesh Tearers Red, which is a nice rich dark red. So apply that fairly liberally so that you get some nice rich even colors. From there, going back to the stone, we're going to use some Biel-Tan Green just in the top area of the stone, and again in some of the recesses and cracks, just to add some different stains and weathering and moldy sort of look. It really brings a bit of definition to that stone and really sort of pops, in my opinion. Now, coming to his nose, I'm just going to dry brush some Screamer Pink and start off very lightly and just work it up. Less is more in dry brushing. You can build it up over time. So start off lightly with the Screamer Pink, and then we're going to do the same with Pink Horror. Again, just building up very lightly. We want a nice sort of bright red nose, flush with blood, and really sticks out on his face. And there I'm doing some Cadian Flesh Tone just to bring the color into a more fleshy pink. And I'm going to start slowly adding in a little bit of Ushabti Bone just to lighten that color out as it gets towards the tip of the nose and the bridge. I'm just going to quickly do the tongue with Volupus Pink, which is my favorite tongue color if you've seen many of my videos, but I find it works really well for those little pokey tongues. Now, quickly, just very carefully doing the eyes with Corax White. Just take your time. He does have fairly large eyes, but just use a nice little fine point tip of a brush and fill those eyes in. Now, for the roots that are growing around the stonework, just use Militarum Green. And because of all the dry brushing, you've already done a lot of the work in the different shading on those vines. So with the green applied over it, a lot of the work is done and it'll look quite nice. Now, coming back to the horns, we're going to use some Ushabti Bone, and I'm going to dry brush that over all of the easily accessible areas with the brush. So that's sort of the tips down to anywhere where you're not going to dry brush over the areas that you've already painted. And do it fairly heavily, but enough that it'll leave a little bit of the shading in the recess. And then we're going to use a brush around the base of the horns and just paint the lines in with the Ushabti Bone, just leaving that skeleton horde in the cracks. Now I'm going to do the same with Wraithbone, but we're going to focus the dry brushing towards the tips of the horns. Just let it build up towards the edges. And then again, we're going to come in with the brush and just add some little defining lines on some of the more prominent ridges on the bone structure around his face and up the sides and somewhat. Also make sure you do the same with the nails and the teeth, just getting some of those ridges and tips. Now I'm going to use some Eldari Emerald and apply that on the armor and helmets and shield, and a little bit on the sword that are all located on his back and on the steps and whatnot. From there, I'm going to use some snakebite leather, apply that to all the strapping that is on his weapon, and holding the shell and the weapon together in his hand there. Apply that fairly thick. You can see there I'm letting it pull up in certain areas, and it really gives some different tone differences on the leather, I find. So just apply that without letting it run and be too thick. You want it to pull up just enough. So play around with the consistency of that and how much you allow it to pull, but I find it comes together with quite a nice effect rather than thinning it out too much. Now I'm going to apply some Basilicanum Grey over all of the beard and hair around his face. Now again, this has all been already highlighted a lot with all of the dry brushing we did earlier in the process. And so now applying that grey over that will just really bring that colour down and make it look like quite a nice dark greyish beard. Now I've just gone through some of the different metallics on his back, the sword blade, there's a little bit of gold on some of the helmet trimmings, just whatever metallics that you might have handy, just pick some of those out on his back. Then what I've done is just applied some Agrax Earthshade over those metallics, as well as the Eldari Emerald armor, just to tie them together a bit and give them a bit of weathering and earthy tones. Now I've gone in with some highlighting on the loincloth and the cloth on the back with some Mephiston Red. I've been fairly rough with this and just applied it on all the raised areas and sort of sketched it in over the Flesh Tearers Red, just to bring some highlights to some of the more raised or stressed or sort of scratchy areas on that cloth. Then I've used some Plague Bearer flesh and applied that to the oozy, mossy, moldy stuff that's hanging off his horns and under his right arm there. And then for something a little bit different, I've used some Targor Rage shade to colour the shell, give it a kind of greyish, purpley tone for the shell over the dry brushing that we've done previously. And then finally, just to bring the eyes out a little bit, I've done some Calidor Sky sort of on the bags, under the eyes and around the top, just to make those eyes really stand out. And then I've applied little irises with a black, just carefully dotting that in. And with that, Trog the Troggoth King is ready to hit the battlefields. I had a blast painting this one. I hope you have fun painting yours, and I hope you enjoyed my video. I hope it's helpful. As always, if you could like and subscribe, it would really help the channel grow. And bye for now.